Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Literature, Black History. This is Jason Williams, and tonight is February 5th, the beginning of the month, where we can celebrate Black History. February, Black History Month. Now, this page was created to create our own narratives, to tell our own history in our own words, and in 2018, we do not recognize anything called Black History Month. I started this page back in April, and we've been covering Black history, and I still haven't scratched the surface of what I want to cover for Black history. However, if you want to recognize Black History Month in February, you need to teach it correctly, because the way that it's been taught in the public school system and all around the United States has been totally incorrect. It has been like celebrating Martin Luther King Day without knowing who Martin Luther King is, or without even mentioning Martin Luther King. And we don't even celebrate Martin Luther King Day right, because we always end Martin Luther King Day with the "I Have a Dream" speech, even though Martin Luther King, in his own words, said that he no longer believed in that dream. That dream turned into a nightmare, and he felt that he was leading his people into a burning house. That is how Martin Luther King Day should end.
I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare.
However, we celebrate Black History Month without even mentioning who created Black History Month. And there's a reason behind that. And that's why we need pages like mine and others to create our own narrative. If you want to celebrate Black History Month, you must mention Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson created Black History Week back in 1926 to bring to the forefront an awareness that Black people had a part in American history. Carter G. Woodson was a historian. And in the 1920s, that was the years of the so-called Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes termed it as an invasion, the Harlem Invasion, because he said that they always had the cabarets, they always had the art, they always had the music, but in the 1920s, that's when white people decided to go down to Harlem and invade the cabarets, bar Black people from certain cabarets, and just participate in the music and the laughter and the adult activities during the evening, and then return back to their communities in the daytime. But that's another video. But if you want to celebrate Black history, you need to address who Carter G. Woodson was. And you can't talk about Carter G. Woodson without recognizing his most magnificent work, which is The Miseducation of the Negro. Now, many teachers don't want to talk about Carter G. Woodson and the miseducation of the Negro because they never read The Miseducation of the Negro. Because if they had read The Miseducation of the Negro, they would find out that they themselves have been miseducated. And when you find out yourself that you have been miseducated, that changes your whole view of how you see reality. And a lot of people in the United States don't want their vision of reality to be altered. Because if you discuss the miseducation of the Negro, then you have to talk about what is called post-colonialism and regular colonialism. Because Carter G. Woodson created the miseducation of the Negro after he was sent to the Philippines, which the United States bought from Spain for $20 million during the American-Filipino War, dominated the Filipinos, killed many Filipinos, referred to Filipinos with the exact same racial slurs that they referred to black people, and the soldiers who were sent to the Philippines to fight for the U.S. did not want to participate in that war. And I have a page on Captain David Fagan, who defected from the U.S. Army to fight with the Filipinos. And you should go check that page out. I got many views on that page, and it's very eye-opening. And I'm going to do some more videos to cover that war. But Carter G. Woodson was sent to the Philippines to miseducate the Filipinos, and when he came back to the U.S., he wrote The Miseducation of the Negro, and he covers all aspects of black life, economics, history, the way that we see ourselves, just miseducation on all aspects. So if you want to teach black history, you have to recognize Carter G. Woodson, but then that forces you to recognize the miseducation of the Negro. That forces you to teach what happened during the Filipino-American War. And then if you dig further in to Carter G. Woodson's life, you will see that he worked with many of the black leaders and upcoming black leaders during his lifetime, such as Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes' so-called first real job was with Carter G. Woodson. And I started out my webpage covering Langston Hughes' life because using Langston Hughes' life as like a car to drive me through black history, we started off with his writings, which addressed what was going on during the 1920s and the 1930s and the ways of white folks. We covered that because Langston Hughes, in his own words, said that he ultimately wanted to be a storyteller, not just a poet. His stories in the ways of white folks are very much more powerful than many of the poems that we read of Langston Hughes. But there's a lot of poems that Langston Hughes wrote that we don't address because they were very militant. And it wasn't all about let's all come together in the United States, because many of the black people who lived during the time period in 1926, when Black History Month was created, many black people were not willing to integrate with white people because the way that they were treated cruelly by white people during that time period. So, when we followed Langston Hughes, we talked about his history. And then in his history, he had to talk about the John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry. You'd have to teach about that. Then you'd have to teach about the Chicago race riots. Because Langston Hughes worked with Carter G. Woodson, there's a connection. And then in 1926, when Carter G. Woodson created Black History Week, that's when the magazine Fire came out in 1926. Fire, that was Langston Hughes' crew and Wallace Thurman's crew. Wallace Thurman, Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, and other writers formed a group called the Niggerati. So in 1926, you got to talk about what was going on during that time period if you want to talk about Black History Month. You can't start Black History Month with the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was in the 60s. And that is not even taught correctly, because you can't talk about the Civil Rights Movement without mentioning Emmett Till. Emmett Till, the death of Emmett Till was when the Civil Rights Movement really started. Not with Rosa Parks sitting on the bus. Many people sat on the bus and got arrested because they didn't want to give up their seat. That's not where it started. That's a convenient and a very peaceful place to start. Because the story of Emmett Till is horrible. And you can't sit there and tell me that this stuff happened a long time ago, because if Emmett Till had lived, he would be 76 years old today. He would still be alive. As a matter of fact, the woman who told her husband and the other men that Emmett Till verbally and physically made advances towards her, which led to his brutal murder, recanted the story and said it was all a lie. She's still alive today. And she's 82 years old. So you can't say that this stuff happened a long time ago. But let's go back to Black History Month, which Carter G. Woodson started in 1926. In 1925, Malcolm X was born. In 1925, Marcus Garvey, who created the Back to Africa movement, was charged with fraud and exported back to Jamaica. But Malcolm X's father was a follower of Marcus Garvey. So if you want to address Black History Month, talk about that. Talk about the beginning of Black History Month. Don't jump to Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Dream speech, because that creates just a false narrative. That's not true. That I Have a Dream speech was a great speech, but it didn't mean anything. And Martin Luther King addressed that. So we need to stop holding on to that speech as some representation of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King was assassinated. He was hated during the civil rights movement. So don't hold him up as some godly figure now when you hated him back when he was alive. Yes, he was a great man, and he deserves recognition. He deserves a holiday for his birthday. But when you talk about him and his history, make sure that you're telling the correct narrative. Because the false narrative that you're teaching about him and being nonviolent is turning many Black people against his teachings, because they don't understand nonviolence and they think that he was just making Black people passive for white people to beat up on so we can integrate and sit at the same counters. So we need to stop teaching that. And that's what this page is created for. Now, coming to this page, you must understand that these are the types of discussions that we're going to have. And if you can't handle those types of discussions, then you shouldn't be on my page. A lot of historians who teach Black history and a lot of people who talk about Black history, they get excited and they get motivated and they talk loud, and then they get accused of teaching hate speech, and then they say, oh, he hates all white people. Well, racism is an American discourse. Racism is in America's DNA, as Obama says. So when you talk about Black history, you're talking about America's history, and the relationship between America's history and race relations between Blacks and whites in the United States has never been pretty. And it's full of hate, bigotry, and racism, which will never be conquered until it is confronted. And that's what this page does. Now, on this page, I talk to the Black community about Black history. But anyone can take this information and learn from it, because On my page, I try to show documentation of everything that I talk about. I don't just go off on tangents. And I have some people come to my page and try to disagree with something I said, and they think that I'm sitting here stating some type of opinion. I had somebody disagree with the page that I did on Zora Neale Hurston's how it feels to be a colored me. She disagreed with that page, and that page was nothing but a reading of Zora Neale Hurston's own writing, How It Feels to Be a Colored Me. So how are you going to disagree with that page? But those are people that don't really pay attention. But if you look at my comment section, there's no cursing, there's no arguing. Not to say that that hasn't been put in my comment section, but if you come to my comment section and you're not talking about the topic at hand, or if you're not just joining in the conversation, I delete your comment. I don't even respond to it. If you come to my page and you leave crazy comments and think it's going to get a rise out of me, I just hit hide. And you don't even know that you've been hidden from my page. But I don't want that on my page. This page is an academic class for Black history. So back to Black History Month. Yeah, we don't recognize Black History Month in 2018. And Carter G. Woodson, if he were alive today, he wouldn't be very pleased with this Black History Month. When he created Black History Week, he clearly explained that he wanted Black history to evolve into American history to be discussed. And he was just starting it. He didn't even mention Black History Week when he wrote The Miseducation of the Negro in the 1930s, because he knows that that wasn't his crowning jewel. And you can't teach Black history in a week. You can't teach it in 28 days. You can teach Black history every single day of the week, all year round, for years. Yes, there is enough material. If there wasn't enough material to do that, I wouldn't have a YouTube page. But that's what this YouTube page is for, to create our narrative, our history, in our own words. Because we do not want the story to be that the slaves were treated well on some plantations and bad on others. We don't want the narrative to be that all the slaves were sold by Africans. We don't want the narrative to be that the first slave owner in America was a Black person. We don't want the narrative to be that during the 1920s, all Black people were dancing and laughing and having a great time. We need to know that after slavery, there was the Reconstruction. And then after the Reconstruction, there was Jim Crow. And after Jim Crow, there was segregation. And we need the narrative to be that now, in 2018, there are more Black people in jail than during slavery. And according to the 13th Amendment, that means that there are more Black slaves now, and there are white slaves, because prisoners, according to the 13th Amendment, are slaves legally. So there's more slavery now than there was back during the years of slavery. And that's a fact. And if you look at the images of stuff that is going on today, you realize that everything that's going on today was going on back in during the years of slavery. Read the slave narratives. You can recognize everything that was going on there. You can understand how the slaves that wrote those narratives felt, because you've experienced it yourself if you're an adult. if you read what was going on in the 1920s, you understand how those people felt when they were treated certain ways, because you've been treated that way in your lifetime if you're an adult. The 1920s, the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s to today. Emmett Till was killed when he was 14, and the white men who killed him were acquitted. Tamir Rice was 12 years old, shot and killed by police officers, white men who were acquitted. That's Black history. And you can't just confine that to February. You can't confine that to February. So we don't want to just recognize Black History Month for February. 28 days and 29 some years. So in 2018, there's no Black History Month. Black history is every single day, every day. And it can be taught that way. This is Black Literature, Black History. Have a nice evening.